Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 17th of August, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, apparently the weather is a bit iffy. That's the best we can report. That's from comments that have come into our chat box. And it appears cloudy some places, brighter others, and we're told there's a risk of some thunderstorms, particularly in the south of the country. Not too bad then.
Derivatives. We're starting with derivatives, Brian. And it's a topic we've been discussing quite a lot over the years. The Bank for International Settlements has just taken notice. They have issued a report from the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructure and the Board of the International Organization of Securities Commissions. And this is with regard to, it's a lead into the G20 conference, which is coming up soon. And they're really pretty concerned about the state of the derivatives market. They're saying that they need to ensure that central counterparties are safe and resilient, and that is an important priority for the G20. And these reports deliver on key goals set by the Chinese presidency. But the report itself said it's expected that clearinghouses with shortcomings will address them with the highest priority no later than December the 31st. They're saying now the media coverage of this has been quite serious in the implications. The Wall Street Journal said that clearinghouses still have shortcomings in their risk management and recovery processes, which could have market-wide ramifications in the case of default. Business Insider went further. They said that the comments in the report are slightly terrifying. They said that derivatives are just unexploded nuclear bombs nestling deep in the financial system. And so this is the point that we've been making. Now, of course, who is has the biggest exposure to derivatives? It is none other than Deutsche Bank. And they expressed yesterday warning of another potential Eurozone crisis, Deutsche Bank at frightening levels of weakness. So we're getting the message here. As I say, Deutsche Bank, the greatest exposure to derivatives. And to quote the Express, they say, you can almost cut the fear with a knife, even though, or perhaps because, no one outside of Germany's largest bank really knows what's happening at the Deutsche Bank, and not knowing spreads fear. And here everyone is afraid that the bank will be standing at the door in distress in 4 months before the general election in Germany next year and ask for a recapitalization by the government. A reflection in the media and now from the Bank for International Settlements of the real state of the financial system.
Sorry to interject there, Mike, what a wonderful business that you can run a business into the ground, into technically receivership. And what do? You simply turn up at the government's door and say, we'd like another handout of public money to help us?
Well, that's absolutely right. And of course, the banks have been operating technically bankrupt for a number of years now. The real hint that something is wrong came while I was away on my holiday there, because the Italian banks, there was a bit of a problem there, and the other banks, including Deutsche Bank, used their own money to bail out the Italian banks. Now, as I saw somebody suggesting that this was like the vampire giving their own blood to other vampires, and of course it doesn't work, does it? So what has Lord Rothschild got to say on this? Well, here he is. He says the 6 months under review. His company has just produced a new report. 6 months under review have seen the central bankers continuing what is surely the greatest experiment in monetary policy in the history of the world. And
if I may, Mike, firstly, they talk about derivatives from what you've said, as though derivatives are something new. We've suddenly discovered that they're poisonous, but operating for years and years and years. And the other thing, which I'll just drift in because we're going to mention it later in the news, is that, of course, Deutsche Bank was the big funder of political charity Common Purpose and was fated by the charity as an upstanding role model, particularly for young people. So interesting to see that it's Deutsche Bank that's in deep trouble.
I think they're all in deep trouble. It's just in the deepest. But Rothschild this was a report from Rothschild's Investment Trust. And he was saying, he went on to say, we are therefore in uncharted waters and it is impossible to predict the unintended consequences of very low interest rates, with some 30% of global government debt at negative yields, combined with quantitative easing on a massive scale. To date, at least in the stock markets, the policy has been successful, with markets near their highs, while volatility on the whole has remained low. Nearly all classes of investment have been boosted by the rising monetary tide. Meanwhile, growth remains anemic, with weak demand and deflation in parts of the developed world. And he goes on to discuss the various risks. At the end of the day, any suggestion that this is unintended consequences, I believe, is nonsense. Rothschild, in particular, knows exactly what's going on in the financial system. They know what's needed to fix it, and that is to break up the banks, to separate the banks, Glass-Steagall style. They know what's needed. They're fighting against it tooth and nail. So this is not about unintended consequences. And just finally on this, I would just say, if anybody in the media, when this crash comes, as it is going to, if anybody in the media suggests for 1 second that they weren't warned about it, well, Rothschild himself is warning about it today. So they can't pull that one off this time.
But I'm sure they will.
They'll try. Another great financier, George Soros. We mentioned this on Monday that there has been a leak published by DC Leaks of the Open Society, thousands of documents from the Open Society Foundation. Now, of course, many people have been suggesting for a long time that George Soros has been at the center of world events and manipulating world events through the Open Society Foundation. So let's just have a look at, because a couple of days have gone past. And of course, some more information is coming out as people start to read these documents. And this is an Australian news outlet saying one email chain shows that Soros in 2011 personally wrote to the then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, urging intervention in Albania's political unrest. Within days, an envoy he recommended was dispatched to the region. They go on to say that other documents reportedly detail funding from various grassroots organizations that were loosely linked to the 2014 unrest in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, of course, anybody in the alternative media that was suggesting that Soros was involved in the Ferguson unrest was immediately called a conspiracy theorist. And in other places, they also mention that the refugee crisis, this is a quote from the documents, the refugee crisis means new opportunities for Soros organizations to influence immigration policies on a global scale. So the document's clearly showing that Soros is involved in this type of activity. Nonetheless, if you have a look at the Independent today, they are absolutely labeling anybody that's looking at these documents a conspiracy theorist and an anti-Semite as well.
Good sign that they're very worried about the content of those documents, Mike. The moment the theory element comes in, what we're really looking at is a criminal conspiracy. That is what it is. The moment you see the theory strapped on the end of it, that is the establishment saying that they're very frightened about what's happening and the ability for people to see through it, which is an encouraging thing, I think.
Right. So let's just remind ourselves what type of person George Soros is. Because, of course, he was distributing letters to he's Jewish himself, to other Hungarian Jewish families during the Second World War from the Nazis. These were basically their deportation notices. And when he was on CBS on 60 Minutes in 1998, this is just a quote from that, he was interviewed by Steve Croft. Steve Croft said, "And you watched lots of people get shipped off to the death camps." And he said, right, I was 14 years old, and I would say that's when my character was made. So he called that the happiest time of his life, working for the Nazis. I think it was the foreword to his father's autobiography, and he said, it's a sacrilegious thing to say, but these 10 months, referring to the Nazi occupation, were the happiest times of my life. We led an adventurous life, and we had fun together. So that's just, an impression of what this man represents, and so he has no concerns about involving himself at the highest geopolitical level, and he doesn't care too much how many people die as a consequence.
No, and of course we keep pushing home to the fact that his hand and certainly his money is behind so many of the non-governmental organisations that you see stirring up trouble around the world. And if it's subversion, if it's revolution, colour revolutions, evidence for Soros's hand is growing and growing. And I think it's got to be pretty significant that Putin has identified him as an undesirable and doesn't want him near the country. But you mentioned in there Hillary Clinton, and the Hillary Clinton-Soros relationship is, of course, an interesting one. Now, I touched on this yesterday. I'm going to come back onto it. And this is the state of Hillary Clinton's health. Now, this is a very, very interesting article from Global Research. Hillary Clinton medical records leaked, dementia, seizures and blackouts. Now, the first thing I'm going to say is, quite rightly, at the bottom of this article, it says the article below should be read with caution. But the basic story here is that apparently her medical records have been leaked, and those leaked documents show that she's suffering from untreatable and pretty serious physical mental problems, which place her ability to hold any form of office in the US under, well, it's just impossible, really. There's now been another death around the release of these documents, and people are saying that the CIA have actually been involved in the background as well. So we're going to say, at the moment, we are being very cautious about the information that's coming out in a documentary sense, but it does appear that more and more people are now starting to look at Hillary Clinton and say something is badly wrong. Now, if you want to investigate this for yourself, I would say go and have a look at YouTube. And there are now quite a collection of video clips of Hillary Clinton talking at very large rallies in some cases, where you see her, I've used the word freeze. She suddenly appears to become confused and disorientated, and you'll see her looking blankly, and she's clearly lost for words. And in some cases, she has to be rescued. But there's a number of these clips. This is one particular one where you see the bodyguard on her right, as we're looking at that photograph, has come up onto the podium because her behaviour is so strange. And I think some people in this one almost thought she was going to faint.
Well, that's what I thought when he came running up. I thought he ran up because he thought she was going to faint and he needed to hold her up.
Yeah. Now, this one, blurred picture, but it's blurred because this is Hillary Clinton while she was being interviewed. There's a little cluster of journalists around her, and suddenly she jolts her head right back, and then she's shaking her head in an extremely strange way, to such an extent that one of the lady journalists that she's speaking to recoils with a look of horror on her face. So these are clips that you can go and look at yourself. You can make your own judgment, but they're not amateur video clips. These are clips of taken by large media outfits. And the last one is the most incredible one. She is with Bill Clinton. She's moving off the stage when suddenly she throws her head back. Her eyes are wandering all over the place. And then it's almost as though she's looking up and seeing something unpleasant above her. And she opens her mouth with this complete look of horror. So have a look at these clips. My opinion from what I've seen, this woman is totally unfit to hold any form of office. And what a sight it must be for countries overseas, external to the States, who are saying, well, this woman could become president, and we've got to deal with her. Is she rational? Is she sane? Is she likely to have a seizure during important talks? And as somebody said, is she likely to have a seizure at the moment they're asking about nuclear weapons? Dangerous stuff. And I think I'll just end by saying that somebody in one of the comments that I read said, well, why would people continue to support her? And the answer was that very powerful figures such as George Soros have made this woman the next objective, and therefore they can't back away from it.
Something I was reading today is that the so-called millennial generation in the States is absolutely not buying into either of these candidates. And So they're not getting fooled by what's being presented in front of them, but you've got to ask then, where does that leave the nation?
Well, rudderless, basically.
Yeah.
So we now see a superpower not only degenerating socially and economically, but we haven't got a stable leader. No wonder Putin is telling international journalists that they need to wake up as to where the real problem is in the world.
Okay, Northern Ireland. This is James Brokenshire, who is the Secretary of State, and he was at Bush Mills having a whiskey yesterday, and he is apparently starting what is being described as an intensive round of visits and with meetings with businesses, political leaders, and community groups. And I wanted to highlight this, Brian, because again, this is a subject that we've been covering for a long time, but we've talked about this week already, which is the changing relationship between the individual and the nation, and particularly this move towards participatory democracy. Because the first line of the press release that goes with this visit to Northern Ireland is, it's talking about meetings with businesses, political leaders, and community groups. He's not going to meet with individuals. It goes on to say, championing Northern Ireland's interests will be the priority of the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, James Brokenshire, this month, as he carries out an extensive round of visits and meetings with business, political leaders, and community groups. And as you can see there, he said, we all want to make a success of the decision by the people of the UK to leave the EU, and I want to get alongside people to hear what they think on behalf of the UK government. I'm determined we prepare together for the challenge ahead. Now, I just wanted to make a couple of points about this. Hillary Clinton, who we've just mentioned, she was talking about back in 2012 when Egypt was going through some problems. The quote was that she said that Egypt at that time should move towards participatory government, and she said that the Egyptian establishment should make sure there's no vacuum in this process of transition. So participatory democracy is a transition process for Egypt, is what she was saying. And this, of course, is the form of governance which is preferred by the globalists, by the corporations, by the United Nations and the EU and organizations like this. And I just wanted to quote here from the UN Eminent Persons panel. They said, traditional democracy aggregates citizens by communities of neighborhood, their electoral districts, but in participatory democracy, citizens aggregate in communities of interest. And thanks to modern information and communication technologies, these communities of interest can be global as well as local. And so what we're talking about here is the NGOs. We're back into Soros again. So what we're seeing is George Soros not only spending money on NGOs right around the world, but those NGOs then having direct lines of communication into government. And I just, again, from 2012, because it was just the quote I had to hand, I want to highlight something from Hansard. It was David Miliband in the House of Commons, and he was talking about, he said that only in Britain do we have a major party opposed to the contents of a treaty. I can't remember which treaty it was. The National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children has pledged its support for the provisions of the treaty. And he went on to say, NSPCC pledges support, as have One World Action and Oxfam. And he's going to continue along a course of action based on what they say and not based on what constituents say or what MPs say. It's about what the people that are entitled to participate say. Well, and that is a complete change in the relationship between us as individuals and the nation.
Yes, and it's been driven in very quickly. If we want to give a simple example, in this country, every time the matter of child abuse comes up, who is quoted? Well, NSPCC, Barnardo's and other charities are quoted as if they have a place in the political decision-making policy. So that's a very easy one to give. And then, of course, those charities are locked in alongside the police. There's another question to be asked there. Yeah. But if we wanted an overseas example of what's going on, well, thank you very much to the viewer who sent us this through. And they'd found a document talking about super diversity in New Zealand. This is all about developing what there's called cultural capability. The interesting thing about this is that it revealed common purpose working in the shadows to destabilise New Zealand. And what I mean by that is that they are deliberately attacking the present relationship of society, constitution, how people deal with each other, but done from the background. Auckland's to be used as a laboratory. Now, this is a very, very interesting statement, which we'll have a look at. And this one, Mike, you'll instantly pick up on. It says that global cities are to become more powerful. So here we see nation states being broken down, the power to be concentrated in global city states. And anybody who's outside one of those presumably is a bit of a nuisance and will be eradicated. Julia Middleton, in the heart of it, she's gone very quiet in UK because, of course, people can see her here, but she's been travelling the world and she wants to change the world very quickly. So there's speed coming in here, Mike, and I think this is because they know they're being watched. Newspeak, and we'll come on to that. And what we're really seeing is this cultural diversity being used as a weapon. So we can't have people in their normal cultural groups. We've got to have global diversity. That just means one big blob. And then we're going to be controlled through these city states. Well, I'm going to encourage people to find this document themselves, but we'll just show you a bit of it. This is the chairperson of the Super Diversity Network. It's a lady called Mai Chen. But here's the real star of the show. It's Julia Middleton with one of her finer photographs, I think. And usual background, of course, because it doesn't say anything really about her. She went to a school in France and finishing school in Switzerland, I think. Lived in America for a while. Then she's involved with Demos. And now she is traveling the world to tell all of us that the world is going to change into her model. So what's she got to say? Well, she says the core is the stuff that if somebody stopped doing, they would no longer be them. There are all kinds of things on that list, everything from values to beliefs, right down to behaviours which, if I stopped doing, I would no longer be me. And there are things in which I'm flexible, my flex. And this oversimplistic model produces for me lots of clarity about people who cannot cross cultures. If your core is strong and solid, then I believe that people trust you more. If your flex is flexible, people trust you more. Imagine a man with a huge core and a tiny flex. That's a bit of a compliment. That would have been my grandparents. They had huge cores and tiny flex. They lived in the northeast of England and reckoned that everybody in their street was like them. And if they weren't, they jolly well should be. And now imagine a man with a tiny core and a huge flex. That was my first boss. He was a salesman, and I was watching him thinking, is there anything he wouldn't say for a sale? So I hope our audience today understands what Ms. Middleton is getting at there. But one of the things she is definitely putting across is that if you hold any of the values which would have been core values in Britain, going back into whatever we want to do, 1930s, 40s, 50s, those are not the values that Julia Middleton wants. So we're going to get rid of family-type communities. We're going to get rid of people who had basic beliefs on hard work, honesty, trust, openness, and it's going to be replaced by big men with little flexes. Do you think she's okay, Mike, or do you think this lady's got some issues?
I think she's got some issues.
She's got some issues. Well, let's move on through because, of course, this is where New Zealand is going to go. So a summary of the forum here, we're saying that New Zealand's population is super diverse. It's got 160 languages, 230 ethnicities. Tricky one to say that, I'm sorry. And they're very pleased about this, that New Zealand isn't a single culture or a few cultures. It's becoming very multicultural. And here it is, as globalization continues, cities will increasingly become the meeting places of the world's population. And if we go down to the bottom, one of the ideas from the morning session is that Auckland, being a relatively compact city, and the fourth most super diverse in the world in terms of incoming migrants, is something of a consumer laboratory in which the consumption habits of the changing world can be tested and the approaches pioneered. So people regarded as lab rats by the common purpose future leaders. These are very, very dangerous individuals, and this is driven right into the heart of society in New Zealand with the support of the local councils.
If anybody hasn't seen it yet, get onto the UK Column website and look at the article. Just a few quotes I put together from or pulled out of some books by Bertrand Russell, and you'll get an idea of where this is coming from.
Indeed. Well, before we just leave it, let's make sure we know exactly where Julia Middleton is going, because she's interested in CQ, the set of skills that enables a person to operate and thrive across cultural borders. So CQ is cultural quotient. And she says you've got to have this together with intelligence quotient and emotional quotient. And if you've got those three, then you can operate as a future leader across borders in the globalized world that she's helping to create. And of course, where did the money come from to create common purpose? Well, we know it came from a selection of banks, including Deutsche Bank, but Julia Middleton has always been very reluctant to tell the public exactly who funded the creation of organisation. And we'll remind people, of course, that it was common purpose that was heavily involved with the Tory government, with Francis Maude. So we had the Cabinet Office falsifying documents to cover up common purpose insider dealings. We had Sir David Bell, the chairman then of Common Purpose, was present in meetings at which his charity was going to get nice little deals, no conflict of interest declared, of course. And then we had emails between Julia and the Cabinet Office, which he signed Love Julia. And the plans were that CP was going to train the top 200 civil servants. And I'm pretty sure that's happened, Mike, because we are now seeing civil service policy basically progress this move towards participatory democracy and, of course, the power of city states and city mayors. If you're going to do this, you need to control the media. So stay with us. All we're going to do is just remind you that it was common purpose, of course, that kicked off the crude attempt of Lord Leveson to take control press and media for the government. And here in the bottom corner, we've got the origins of common purpose linked, as I've said, with very big money, Deutsche Bank and Demos. What do we call that? Cultural Marxist organisation, I think, Mike. So that led through to Common Purpose and the Media Standards Trust and ultimately Lord Leveson. But we can also say what's happened since Leveson, because all the work of those Common Purpose teams have now unleashed this very complex situation where many people in the mainstream media are frightened to do any investigative journalism because they might be regulated, and that regulation will, of course, have come from Common Purpose.
It's interesting that you mentioned Leveson because, of course, one of the things which started that whole process was the alleged hacking of a voicemail on Millie Downer's phone. Yeah. Well, one of the people that was investigated by the Independent Police Complaints Commission was Detective Superintendent Maria Woodall. Well, she apparently is beginning a pilot scheme to be run by the City of London Police, and they're going to use private law firms operating for profit in order to allegedly tackle online crime and fraud cases. So what the quote here that I've got, she says, in certain complex cases, it's not always possible for law enforcement to bring a case to a level where it would be possible to restrain assets under the Proceeds of Crime Act with a lower standard of proof required in the civil recovery of assets. Officers hope that it will make the process much faster and it will mean assets are more likely to be seized before criminals have a chance to move or dissipate them. So the key point is here, she is aiming for a lower burden of proof there'll be no proper police investigation if City of London police decide that you're a target and they decide that you're a criminal, in inverted commas. They're going to employ a private law firm to take you to court in an attempt to seize your assets without the necessary burden of proof required to demonstrate that you're a criminal in the first place. That is incompatible with the Proceeds of Crime Act. It's incompatible with the law.
But it's totally compatible if we've got a criminal outfit running the country and certainly running the City of London.
Absolutely.
So frightening stuff, particularly seen against the background of this one here. This is a report from the Birmingham Mail, and it says that dozens of West Midlands police officers have been avoiding disciplinary action by retiring. Now, this is a subject that's been talked about before, but this paper has done some work, so they've got some good statistics showing a breakdown in the number of police and their ranks that have said, well, they're facing disciplinary and usually criminal charges. So what do? You retire and the problem goes away. Well, let's bring in the sad death of Dalian Atkinson that you mentioned, Mike, as a result of him being tasered by the police. The BBC reporting an eyewitness here. And what does this lady say? Paula Quinn, who lives in a first floor flat near the Atkinson property in Trent, said they were shouting and kicking so much, all I could hear were the boots hitting him.
And they is the police.
They is the police, yeah. And then the officer who released the taser stepped back while the other officer still continued to kick. And then I could hear him shout at the other officer that was still kicking, back off, back off, back off. So we've now got something very interesting here. We've got a man who was tasered, fell to the floor. We understand now he was undergoing dialysis treatment. So there's some indications he got some mental health problems. He's tasered, he falls to the floor. And what is this eyewitness saying? That he was then being repeatedly kicked before he was tasered at least two or three more times. So this is Britain's police forces out of control. And if you accept that that is true, then we have to say, how has this situation arisen? It can only have come through the selection, the recruitment of the wrong type of police, followed by the wrong type of training. And of course, one of the factors that's come into police training over relatively recent years is the use of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, if anybody's unaware of what that is. So let's have a look at our Prime Minister and, of course, former Home Secretary responsible for all this, speaking at the time of some changes to the law, which meant that the police couldn't simply bail out. So this was January 2015. She said the ability of officers to avoid potential dismissal by resigning or retiring is an unacceptable situation. Direct damage has been done to public confidence by cases in which officers escape justice by resigning or retiring when they might have been dismissed. And we just like to say, well, let's remember that this is the same Ms. May who has absolutely failed to give any support to a Met policeman who stayed in his job and took huge personal risks in order to blow the whistle on the cover-up of vicious child abuse in London. These people are becoming just disgusting, Mike. I lost for words, but the hypocrisy is appalling. And we better bring in our very own MP responsible for policing, Mr. Lewis, because it's now 20 days since we emailed him asking him what support he was going to give to the Metropolitan Police whistleblower, and 20 days of stunning silence from this gentleman. So if any viewers or listeners think that they'd like to make contact with Mr. Lewis to see whether, well, he may be on holiday, of course, he may be on his holes, but if you'd like to contact his office and ask why he's made no statement, we'd be very interested in the response. And if you've been wondering why it's been so difficult for Prime Minister May to get a child abuse inquiry going, well, then here's part of the answer. An excellent article in the Register, encourage you to read it, but apparently it's because they've had trouble setting up an IT system, Mike. as you can imagine, to investigate child abuse, you need to have an IT system. So they've spent £275,000 with a company called Northgate Public Services. They said they were going to pull out, and then I think they said, please don't. But it says that this is the inquiry, are currently in discussion with another potential supplier about providing a system. So apparently it's so difficult to investigate child abuse, and it's so difficult to get a little database set up, Mike.
How long has this inquiry been running now?
I think it's 2 years, effectively, close to 2 years.
It's 2 years, and all the time that they were faffing about trying to find a chairperson, they couldn't have been in the meantime organising an IT system.
It was too difficult for them. And presumably, as somebody has said, this is why the Home Office was unable to access the audio file of the policeman talking about the cover-up. And then when we provided an audio file direct to the Home Office, apparently they still couldn't open it. This is amazing for a government that's talking about IT in government.
Because MP3 is a practically unknown audio standard, and nobody can read that at all.
Well, apparently not the Home Office. I think I'm right in saying the Home Office employs 15,000 people or close to. So a little bit sad, or else this is a scam to make sure there is no child abuse inquiry. If you're interested in the company they used, this is from their website, of course. So it's Northgate Public Services, where they boast of boosting government.
No, rebooting.
Oh, rebooting.
Yes, they're going to reboot government.
As in kick into touch. No, they're going to reboot government. So they're going to restart the interface with government. And if you think that's interesting, well, they're truly innovative. They're making a real difference to people's lives. But I noticed that they're doing it by drawing that by hand. Shouldn't they have a computer producing that image, Mike?
Maybe this is why they can't provide one to the inquiry.
There we are. Well, rest assured, everything's okay. The British government fully involved in criminal activity and so desperate to cover up the child abuse. We've had a little IT problem.
Right. Russia, war, stuff like this. This is Stimson, the think tank, and they issued a report a couple of days ago calling for the US to get their tactical nuclear weapons out of Europe and really sort of take a step back from modernizing the B-61. So, you know, they're saying we recommend that the US forgo the procurement of B-61s intended for delivery by fighter aircraft and remove the weapons from Europe immediately. This would save approximately $3.7 billion from the budget and just over $6 billion during the lifetime of the program, resources that could be used more productively to strengthen conventional forces. And they say during the failed coup attempt in Turkey in July, part of the base was cut off. They're talking about the Incirlik air base in Turkey. Part of the base was cut off, and the Turkish government prohibited US aircraft from flying in or out. Eventually, the base commander was arrested and implicated in the coup planning. And they said whether the US could have maintained control of the weapons in the event of a protracted civil conflict in Turkey is an unanswerable question. So they're absolutely calling for these weapons to be removed from Europe and particularly from Turkey. Any thoughts?
Well, just fascinating because I know what's coming up next, and when you see the two together, there's some. Somebody in the chat box has said that watching life at the moment in these areas is like watching a film, Die Hard or something.
Yeah.
And I think this is part of the problem with the American administration. One is we've got a lady who appears to be seriously ill being put forward as the next president, and we've got senior American military people thinking that they're part of Top Gun. And I think what you're now going to talk about says that something is changing very quickly. Right.
So now Russia has not had a permanent base in the Mediterranean for a long time. And this is a report in the Duran, great website. Do have a look at it. And they're saying that they have the Russians have submitted a document to the Duma for ratification. And that's going to make the airbase at Latakia permanent. And what that means is that, well, mainly for Syria, because that's where it is, not only guarantees Russia support to the present Syrian government, but also provides Syria with a measure of protection it has never had before from Israeli air incursions, which are apparently a lot less frequent now than they were in September 2015 when Russian planes first began arriving in Syria. I can't imagine why. And this report in the Duran goes on to say that since the Second World War, the Mediterranean has largely been viewed as an American lake. And he writes that the Russian base does not have the potential to change drastically political and military perceptions in its eastern half. There is now the prospect of Russian fighters flying over the eastern Mediterranean on regular patrols, monitoring US warships and aircraft in the area, and making Russia's presence felt in an area which has never been felt before. By establishing a permanent base there, Russia has just raised the stakes, a fact that undoubtedly explains the intensity in the Syrian conflict. So, what's your view of that? And
well, I think this is a powerful move, Mike. There's no doubt about it that the Russians are now saying, well, you've pushed us to the wall, and we're not going to be bullied into the corner anymore. So they're now starting to flex their muscles, and the assets that they've got, particularly if they can produce air cover over the eastern part of the Mediterranean, is going to make a huge difference. Because, as it said, Mediterranean used to be regarded as a bit of a NATO lake, do what you like, and particularly with Israel at the eastern end. Now, all of a sudden, Israel is going to be, what's the word? She's going to have to pay attention to that Russian presence.
Yes. I'm going to talk about China for a couple of minutes, and I really sort of just want to highlight China's strategic approach at the moment. Now, of course, the news yesterday was that China has launched this so-called quantum satellite, which is allegedly going to enable hack-proof communications if it works. So what this article in Engadget is saying is if someone tries to intercept some of the quantum transmissions when it's being transmitted by touching it, they make it burst, the quantum particles. Scientists from the US, now this is the key point, scientists from the US, Japan, Canada, and various parts of Europe have been pushing for the development of their own quantum communication system. Unfortunately, their countries' governments haven't been as willing to invest in the development of the technology. And frankly, our governments aren't willing to invest in anything much at the moment. China, within the scope of the current global financial collapse, is just pushing ahead with real development in many, many ways. And you've got to ask the question, Brian, where is the West going to be in 20 years' time? Because we're absolutely losing.
Well, this is stuff, Mike, which I don't think you can ever afford to get behind in the race, because if you get behind in the race, once you're behind, you're never going to move up front again. But your point is quite right, that whether it's UK, well, particularly UK, the government has made sure that our skills base in the high-level technology has just been wiped out constantly. UK's space industry was wiped out deliberately. We've seen it with aerospace stuff for some years. So the British government doesn't want a skills base. Now the Chinese are stepping in and saying, well, thanks very much, we're capable of doing it ourselves. The US, I think America is just in a mess at the moment. Obama has driven the US into a mess. Clinton gets in with mental health issues. I don't know. Where is America going to go?
It's not going to improve.
Not going to improve, yeah.
But here's more. So this is from a couple of days ago, and this is a determination by the Chinese government to increase scientific literacy in the community, within the population. Now, in Britain, there's very little English language literacy, never mind scientific literacy, and that's why the scientific community has so much difficulty communicating with the average British inhabitant. And this article here from the Chinese press saying, according to a science and technology progress plan published by the State Council on Monday, China expects its knowledge-intensive services to contribute to 20% of GDP by 2020. So they're going to educate their population, and they're expecting 20% of GDP as a result of that. And they say, aside from scientific knowledge, such as the Big Bang or evolution theories, scientific understanding also requires citizens to have the relevant thinking ability. So they're going to try to encourage them to be able to think. For example, when an earthquake or an emergency happens, people need to have the basic ability to save themselves and others. And finally, I just want to highlight this because this is the new Chinese rail system. 2,470 bullet trains, either already produced or in production at the moment. 12,000 miles rather, 19,000 kilometers of fast railways. Now, of course, China, a huge country, but nonetheless, if you contrast that with the two articles on the right there from the Yorkshire Post and the Camden New Journal, where we are not only not building bullet trains, but we cannot get any kind of high-speed rail in this country at all. We refuse to invest in it properly. We're making it unpopular by trying to drive it through people's homes. The Chinese just moving ahead with infrastructure left, right, and center, and development of their people, and we're just allowing our people. Well, the No Child Left Behind policy guarantees that our people, nobody ever gets ahead as a result, and we are always aiming for the lowest common denominator.
And this is deliberate policy, Mike, which with hindsight now we can look back through successive governments, and it doesn't matter whether they were Labour or Conservative. You can see this damaging policy constantly coming through. And I've got to say, at the back of my mind, there's also Mr. Beeching and his cuts of the railways in 1963, where you said that an absolutely fantastic network of rail, they couldn't be bothered to spend any money on it to upgrade the areas that were needed. It was all cuts. And of course, ultimately, that stopped the feed into the main rail networks. So a lot of people pointed a finger at Beeching and said that man was brought in order to destroy Britain's rail industry. And it goes on everywhere we look at.
We weren't always this negative, Brian, because in the past, of course, when the rail network was being developed in the first place, communities were dying for a branch line because they knew it represented economic development.
And the technology was also exported overseas. And Indian railways, for example, built on a lot of the original British infrastructure. We weren't negative. What's happened is that we have now got a society, a class of people governing the country who are simply anti this nation state. They do not believe in Britain or British values. They're not interested in ordinary people. These are the future leaders. This is what's so dangerous about political charity, common purpose. And Blair said it in his year 2000, I think it was. We've commented on this before, when he said in the future people will be appointed into positions of power. They're not going to be elected. So these are very, very dangerous individuals because they hate everything about this country. Well, on that unhappy note, but if we don't understand the problem, we can't deal with it. We'll just say that we've got a meeting tonight in Plymouth at the George Hotel. So if you're local or you can drive to come and join us, we'd love to see you there. Thank you for that. Also, I've been corrected over the T-shirts because apparently I had a bit of man colour blindness because what I thought were grey were actually blue. Is that right?
Have you actually looked at them?
What colour are they?
They're navy blue.
Navy blue, apparently. That's pretty similar to grey in my book anyway. And so those T-shirts are available. They are very stylish. So if you haven't got one yet, perhaps you consider putting in an order. We've got some exciting new pens arriving at some stage in the future. So those are biros plus a stylus with the UK column logo on it. And if you haven't got one of these excellent items, please consider putting in an order because every little bit helps us. Okay, that's it for today. Don't get too gloomy. Get out speaking to people and do put your head above the parapet and challenge some of these future leaders that are causing such trouble in this country. And if you can, drop Mr. Lewis, the policing officer, a line. We'd be most grateful. Polite, as always. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.